you headed, John?
I just think we over the stadium.
For 6?
Yeah, I mean, ideally 6. No later than 6:15.
Announcing.
Well,
We're live. Good evening. I would like to call the October 9th, 2023 New Albany Plain Local Board of Education meeting to order. Ms. Jenkins, please call the roll.
Mr. Wilson,
Present.
Mr. McClelland,
here.
Mr. Darrow,
Here.
Vice President Newell,
Here.
President Kalinowski.
Here, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For Jenkins, are there any additions or corrections to tonight's agenda?
I have one correction. Mary Ann Thomas as a bus driver should be listed as $26.49 per hour, not $24.49.
With that correction, may I have a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda?
Second.
Mr. Darrow and Mr. McClelland, Treasurer Jenkins, please call the roll.
Mr. Darrow?
Yes.
Mr. McClelland?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Vice President Newell?
Yes.
President Kalinowski.
Yes, and the motion passes. Next is an opportunity for public participation, and with none, we'll move into discussion items, beginning with the first reading of the 5-year forecast. Treasurer Jenkins.
Thank you. Mr. Galloway will get that up on the screen and we can look through it. Thank you. As always, and as you hear with every presentation, the guiding statement or the statement of purpose guides us in every decision that we make, not just academically, but also financially, and that is to create a culture of accountability that achieves the best academic and developmental outcomes for each student. As you can see on this slide, the district ended fiscal 23 with a $43.4 million positive ending cash balance. Excuse me, that is up $1.9 million from what we had anticipated, and we have discussed that at previous board meeting. Both revenue and expenditure positive variances is what drove that. If you look at the current fiscal year, fiscal 24, we are expecting to bring in $77.1 million in revenue and expending 78.4. So what that tells us is that we are going to spend more than we bring in, or deficit spend by about $1.2 million if all things remain equal. Keep in mind that we do have a continuous improvement plan goal to reduce the current year budget by 1%, at least 1%. We have been able to do that, plus in all previous years. I expect that we will again be able to do that, and that will have a positive impact to the 5-year forecast. Even with deficit spending, if we deficit spend in the current fiscal year, we are still showing that at the 5th year of the forecast, a positive ending cash balance of $7.6 million. So to talk about the assumptions that are behind these numbers, on revenue, every year we receive about $4 million in increased new construction value, except for years when we know that an abatement is expiring. This year, we do have an abatement that is expiring. The value of that is about $12 million. So we will see a little bit more money from revenue, which has already been in the forecast as we had expected that. And again, those abatements have been in place. This is typical. When the abatement expires, the value comes on as new construction on the tax duplicate, and typically you would see a reduction to income tax sharing from the city. That's how that agreement works. I will say that I'm going to jump forward a little bit. We received about $3.4 million last year from the city in income tax sharing, which was higher than I anticipated. So I'm actually leaving that revenue at that level and just not projecting any kind of an increase. I do talk with the city often to see what they see coming, and so we feel comfortable with leaving that assumption the same. Patrick.
Oh.
Okay, and also we've been talking about this as well. So this is a reappraisal year for Franklin County. There are several counties statewide that are going through this, and we are seeing record high increases. And so the Franklin County Auditor did tell us that our residential values are expected to go up about 36% and commercial industrial 24%. So I have that in the forecast. We'll see if that actually happens, and I'll talk a little bit more about some pending legislation in a little bit. And then in 2026 will be an update year, and in that year I have 4% for residential and 2% for commercial. And that's because you would think that if in 2023 the county auditors are setting the values where they should be, then you shouldn't have these huge increases again in 3 years. That could still happen, but we're not going to project that. On the state aid side, we are still under the Fair School Funding formula. State legislators this year with House Bill 33 did approve moving forward with the phase-in of that. And so what that means for New Albany is that we're actually getting more money from the state, which hasn't happened in several years. And so we're expected to get $5.2 million in fiscal 24, the current year, and $5.8 million in fiscal 25. And then what I do is hold that steady for the remaining years. This is the second part of the phase-in. The next biennial budget should include the final phase-in and full implementation, but we don't know that that will or won't happen. So I don't project that and don't include it in the forecast. So as a comparison, last year we received about $3.3 million in state funding. So $2 to $2.5 million more in funding each year. That equates to about $12 million positive variance in the forecast. So that's a huge increase for the school district. And then I already talked about income tax sharing. So I'm happy to answer questions about revenue before I go into expenditures, if you have any.
Ms. Jacobs.
Yes.
I see you have a note in here on tax rates and the and the reduction factors, et cetera, but would you please remind the community of inside millage, outside millage, how that works, just
Certainly.
so folks know.
So the 36% increase, that House Bill 920 that was passed in the 70s says that districts cannot receive more money than they otherwise would have when a levy was passed, except for new construction and inside millage. Each county has 10 inside mills, which are unvoted mills, and that's divided up between school districts, townships, and the county. Our school district receives 4.5 mills of inside millage. So we will see some growth based on this 36% increase, but we will not see a 36% increase in our revenue, nor will our residents see a 36% increase in their tax.
Right. Now, I know you can't give what each person's going to get, obviously, because everyone's going to be different, but you said 4 point, what is in
4.5 mills.
4.5 mills, and what's our outside millage then?
Outside is, let me pull it up. I'm going to just say. Our total effective outside millage is 26.8 mills.
Okay, so roughly, so 16% of our property tax is inside millage. And the balance, we'll just say 85% roughly is outside millage. That is not going up.
Correct. That will roll back. That's what House Bill 920 does. It basically says you passed a levy. I'm just making up numbers. You passed a 10 mil levy. You can't receive any more money because that value goes up. So we're rolling that back. So it's now 8.2 mils.
Right.
So yes, correct. The outside mills or the voted debt will not be increased.
Right. So again, the bulk of our revenue comes from outside millage property taxes.
Correct.
We have lived within our means now for
12, almost 12 years.
almost 12 years, and we're projecting to remain that for another 5 at least. And even though there's a very large property valuation change that's taking place, that's going to happen here, it will not result in an equally large tax increase. In fact, for the schools, 85% of the school taxes will not be going up at all for our residents. About 15% will, and then whatever other taxes that are inside millage, that's
Inside millage.
it's just 10%.
Yes.
So,
And then we also have new construction, but that's
Right.
not on existing homes. That's the actual new construction that
Correct.
happens, and we receive
Yep.
funds from that.
okay,
Yes.
just want to make sure that was all clear.
Ms. Jenkins, the footnote about wages, could you just explain that that's the way that that's been forecast is consistent with prior years in terms of the placeholder, if you will, that we put in those future years after
Yes.
the
We
current
can-
contract?
Yes, we can move to expenditures. Yeah, so what we typically do is when we have a negotiated agreement, I build those actuals in, and then we always have a 1% placeholder in future years, just as a placeholder. We're not saying we're giving one. We're not saying what that is. We're just saying there's probably some increase, and so we want to have a placeholder in there, for sure. Fiscal 24 salaries are up about 1.4% due to degree changes, and then budgeting for all positions being filled. But we also know that we aren't likely to fill all of the positions. We haven't been able to fill all of the positions that we've had open, not just in turnover, but also some of the new positions that we have. And we also likely won't fill all of the new positions that have been budgeted for. And Michael and his team are the ones that go through and decide. It's a very rigorous process that administrators have to go through to justify any kind of new positions. And so they all don't get filled. And I don't expect that they will this year. As again, the base increases, 1% in the current year is an actual, and then the future years, I have 1% in those years as placeholder. Both union contracts expire June 30th of 2024, so we will be negotiating in the spring. And once we know that, we'll plug that into the forecast in May. Fiscal 25 is a bigger increase, and that is because we're bringing all of those ESSER positions that we put in place. We actually have decided that we're going to keep those. So that is coming back into the forecast in fiscal 25. Fiscal 24, again, we begin to deficit spend, and then but we still are showing positive ending cash balance in fiscal 28. With the positive variances in revenue and increases in our expenditures, even with the increases in the expenditure in the current year, the total net positive change to the forecast is $12.5 million through fiscal 27 when we're comparing it to the May 2023 forecast. Fiscal 28 wasn't on that forecast because 27 was the 5th year. So we are still showing that increase. I also wanted to talk about benefits. They will rise and fall with any changes in our personnel, but we also last Thursday received our healthcare premium increases, and that's going to be an 18% this year. It has started out at almost 21%, so we were able to get it down to 18. But we are self-insured, and so the majority of our increase is based on claims, and we have had several high claimants this year. So claims are what's driving that. I did have a 12.5% increase in the current fiscal year and then 10% next year. So this is a little bit of an increase for us, but it's not the entire 18% because I did have some increase projected.
And what was the agreement for how much more we're going to collect in, or have we reached agreement how much more we're going to collect in premiums? Is it going to be that 18%?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we're self-insured, and our rainy day fund or our balance is now about how many months?
But if the claims continue at the level that they're in, we will probably be at a 2 to 2.5 month range, and the target is typically 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
So the
we're a little skinny.
the reserve is getting lower. And we have been able to reduce the increase in previous years because we've had a little higher reserve, but because we're getting closer to that 2 to 3 month, we don't have a lot of room to buy that down. And so next year, if we have high claims again, we'll just have to be very cognizant that we don't have the reserves. And so if it's whatever the increase is, it is.
Okay. Just another comment on the wages. You note in your notes here under wages about the change to the salary schedule. That was about 6 years ago, right? About 6 years ago, changed the salary schedule to solve the boom and bust cycle that we had endured for a couple of decades, frankly, and this board solved that problem pretty effectively, and it's showing in the fact that, again, we're without a new levy for 12 years. And at the same time, we also addressed the insurance challenge, which was growing even more rapidly. This is the largest increase we've had since
we had the
since
huge
that-
change,
yeah.
which drove a lot of the changes in what is covered.
Exactly.
And design.
So, it's a lot of hard work to get to this point, and so we have a year, but we'll see how that continues to go. But otherwise, it's we really have solved that boom and bust cycle problem.
Yes, for sure. So challenges that could happen to the forecast, as I discussed earlier, House Bill 180, I didn't discuss it earlier, actually. There is additional legislation, House Bill 187, because of the really high increases in property values that are statewide. There has been legislation that is introduced, House Bill 187, that is basically saying that county auditors would have to use a 3-year average rather than the most recent sales to market ratio. If that happens, then our increase would not be 36%. It would be something less than that. That could impact negatively the 5-year forecast because we wouldn't see the growth on that 4.5 mils. And I'm not entirely sure what it will do to the state biennial budget because property values are an input, one of the inputs into the state biennial budget. The county auditor has not put anything out to suggest what it could be if they have to use a 3-year average. And there are some other items in that bill, but they don't impact our district. So that's one thing that could be a negative impact. I kind of ran some numbers and it would have to be a really huge decrease to impact the 5th year of the forecast. So I think we'll still be positive at the end of that fiscal year, just not $7.6 million positive. Again, state biennial budget, we know what's happening this year and next year there, but the legislators will have to pass 2 more biennial budgets during the course of this 5-year forecast. So if they fully implement the fair school funding, then we will see additional dollars. But if they don't, or if they change the funding, that could have an impact. We're still working on what Intel impact could have on the school district with cooperative strategies, hoping to have a finalized report in the next few weeks. And then, of course, the economy, income tax sharing with the city. We receive about $3.4 million from the city in income tax sharing. So that is a substantial revenue for us.
By the way, on Intel, I think we're talking more about enrollment
Yes.
projections because Intel's not in our districts.
Correct. We are not going to see income from Intel. It would be on the expense side. And we're talking, do we need new buildings? Are we going to see a lot of enrollment? What's going to happen with residential and commercial building and those things? Yes, thank you for that reminder. Happy to answer any additional questions you have. It's good news for the district. I wouldn't have guessed that we would see so much new income from the state, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Thank
I don't want
you.
to, well, sorry.
Go ahead.
I don't want to pour any cold water on this, but because I think, sorry, I do think it's great. And I think it is a testament to the hard work that's been done over the years by you, Ms. Jenkins, and Mr. Sawyers, and this board to be fiscally responsible. And we've made it now 12 years by doing that. At some point, I think it is fair to say, though, at some point, just the expenses are just going to outweigh everything here, and it is happening. I mean, we're getting to the end of the 5th year. We're still going to be very positive at this point. There are things that could obviously happen, but I think to your point, I think it's good for the general public to know that starting next year, we are going to be spending more than we are bringing in. And we've been able to stretch that, which is why we can get to the end of the 5 years. But just because there's a positive cash balance at the end of 5 years does not mean that everything's, all rosy. So we still have a lot of work to do. And there are a lot of other things that could happen over the next few years. So while this is great, it's positive, and the result of all the hard work that's been done over the last several years, we have to keep doing that work. And I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of that, remind the public of that. I know we have a lot of things that we talk about here at the school board on a day-to-day basis, but the management of the district finances and making sure that we are thinking long-term about the things that are the long-term important things is really what the focus of this board needs to continue to be.
Absolutely. This is a snapshot in time. And I'm confident in saying that right after the board approves this at the next board meeting, it's probably wrong because I'm going to have other inputs that I know about. I should know about House Bill 187 by then. And so it is a snapshot in time, and we shouldn't be comfortable and say, put the brakes on. We still need to do a lot of work. Yeah, absolutely.
Becky, the inside millage, is that already baked into the 5-year?
Yes.
Okay. The other comment I would make to just piggyback on what John said is, each year in our CIP continuous improvement plan, we have that goal for 1% cost savings. And we can't take that for granted either. That becomes increasingly difficult as we keep putting that in our
Yes.
plan
Yes.
to keep cutting. So yeah, there's a lot of good news there, but eventually we will we will be needing to come back and ask for support too.
Yes. Proceed with caution.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? Or comments? So now may I have a motion and a second for superintendent's items A and B, please?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Darrow and Mr. McClellan, Treasurer Jenkins.
Thank you. These are items A, personnel or standard employment action items with hiring and resignations, and then B are standard action items that include some educational, non-educational, and athletic trips. We also have one senior waiver for the 23-24 school year, and also an approved for a credential evaluator. Happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Jenkins, please call the roll.
Mr. Darrow?
Yes.
Mr. McClellan?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Vice President Newmaw?
Yes.
President Kalinowski?
Yes, and the motion carries. That brings us to adjournment for this evening. May I have a motion and a second to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Darrow and Mr. Wilson, Treasurer Jenkins, please call the roll.
Mr. Darrow?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. McClellan?
Yes.
Vice President Newmaw?
Yes.
President Kalinowski?
Yes, and the motion carries. Our next meeting is on Monday, October 23rd at 6 p.m. at this location. Thank you.
30? Is that?
I didn't get consensus on that.
Oh, okay. I just wasn't sure.
5:30?
5:30.
At 5:30 at this location. Thank you.